Oh my god, there's an ant. Oh, I killed it on my screen. Nice. Hello, my name is Sydney, and in today's video, I'm going to go over the AMCAS work and activities section, as well as share some writing tips and recommendations on how you can get started. In my next video, I'll be sharing my specific writing strategy and approach, along with some examples. And my next video will be a deep dive into what I included on my own AMCAS application. If you're curious about how the tips I mentioned here apply to personal examples, please consider subscribing to be notified of those upcoming uploads. As always, timestamps of each specific section will be included in the description below. Without further ado, let's begin. Work and activities information. The work and activities is the opportunity to list all of your medical and non-medical extracurriculars. This section adds the humanness in your application, the first Costco sample of your Kirkland-sized personal statement, if you will. You can enter up to 15 activities, and of those 15, you'd indicate 3 as your most meaningful. For each entry, you are prompted to fill out the following information. Experience type. You have 18 classifications to categorize your activity. So this includes, actually no, I'm gonna list it on the screen and just like rolling credit it, because scroll, you can read it, you got it. Next is experience name, your start and end date. Keep in mind, you do not have to have this be a continuous involvement. You can do some breaks within your start and end dates in case your involvement spanned over the years. Total hours. So let's say you are still in this involvement. I would suggest to conservatively estimate the amount of hours you would have upon completion. The organization name, country, state, city, the contact's first and last name, title, so what they were in relation to that involvement, as well as their email address or phone number. So after listing all this basic information, you will be prompted to fill out the experience description, as well as indicate whether this was a meaningful involvement or not. Character limit wise, you are allotted 700 characters, including spaces, for each experience description. For your most meaningful activities, you will be given an additional 1,325 characters, including spaces. Regardless of the order you input your experiences, they will appear chronologically when AdCom reviews your work and activities. Content wise, you can write your experience descriptions in full sentences or bullet points, which I will elaborate on which scenario is more applicable later in the video. Work and activity writing tips. I'm going to list the tips that I employed while writing the work and activity section if you wanted to take a moment to pause. Tip number 1, focus on your theme. I've mentioned this across pretty much all of my AMCAS application videos, but it is so imperative to structure everything on your theme or your reason to pursue medicine. I would ask yourself frequently while writing, does this involvement support why I want to do medicine? At the end of every experience description, make sure you extrapolate how this relates to medicine in order to focus on your theme. It shows a deep level of maturity in being able to not only create connections, but to also show how you've repeatedly developed these qualities and can now apply them as a physician in the future. Tip number 2, employ the SMART framework. So I kind of borrowed the terminology for SMART goals. I find that resume building or just writing to convey yourself, having this framework is so important to keep your entries very strong and impactful. To break down each one, S, specific. What exactly did you do? What is your job title? And why did you do it? What was the purpose of what you did in this involvement? M, measurable. What was the impact that came about your contribution? Relate your accomplishments or the work that you put in to some numeric value. For example, instead of saying, I worked on this project, I developed 60 guides in this project, I presented 10 times to this organization, just to give more meaning to the impact that you contributed. A, for achievable. This underlies the whole show don't tell mantra. So instead of saying you were X, Y, and Z, I was determined, I was passionate, I was empathetic, show that you were and have your accomplishments and achievements speak on those characteristics. R, realistic. Emphasize how your short-term immediate results led to long-term future goals of that organization or involvement. But I do want to note to not speak in outlandish hypothetical. Show how your contribution set the foundation for future generations to thrive. Lastly, T, for timely. In each description to mention time to showcase context and scale. Tip number 3, avoid redundancy. Within your description, only include context that is new. Don't reference anything that someone can just easily look above and see, like experience name, experience's contact, is how long they did this involvement. My second sub-tip to avoid redundancy is to only introduce information if it is necessary, since the focus should be entirely on you. Instead of going on and on and on describing what the organization you were part of, short description is fine. Focus on what you did within that involvement. Tip number 5, consolidate similar experiences. And you might ask yourself, like, wait, if I consolidate everything, then what do I list above? I would list your first involvement and experience contact name, but I would elaborate and include everything in your experience description. Some sections that I personally consolidated were honors, awards, recognitions, shadowing, research. I'm actually going to put an example on the screen. I listed all of my dates that I shadowed. Since you can list multiple instances, I combined the total number of hours that I shadowed. I assigned one position as the main contact in the experience name and contact area, but I listed all the other specialties that I shadowed as well as their contact information within the description. I listed the name, credential, contact info, specifically their email address just to keep it consistent, the specialty, as well as the number of hours I shadowed them and the location. At the end, just to reference to the amount of hours that I listed above, I put month and year just so AdCom can kind of piece together what belonged to what. And if I did anything additional to shadowing, I included a short description with what work I did with that position. I'd only suggest you do this if you're kind of coming from the same angle as I am, service-based, but I would definitely separate if each research involvement that you did was meaningful to you. I also consolidated my most meaningful involvements. With those extra characters, I was able to elaborate on how that involvement led to other volunteering experiences. This shows it is a long-term commitment as well as there's a lot of diversity within this one experience. Tip number 6, show all aspects of you. This includes your hobbies, artistic endeavors, and your extracurricular activities. If you don't think this is relevant, if it's important to you, it's important to include. I would say it's relevant if this experience shaped you in any way, because the characteristics that constitute you relate to your theme of medicine. In doing so, you're able to highlight the universal qualities that would make you a successful student and physician. Tip number 7, save characters. I'm gonna throw some bonus tips at you to kind of condense your character count, since I definitely struggle with that. 1, bullet pointing activities that are universally known or can stand for their own. For example, I mentioned this earlier, I did this with the honors, awards, recognitions section. For any GPA distinction, the terms summa, magna, or cum laude can stand on their own. You can also mention the honors associated with your major. Phi Beta Kappa is also something that's universally known. But for those niche awards, you can just name the award as well as a short bullet point describing what that award entailed. This is me doing the absolute most, but I also included my certifications within this category. So for example, I listed BLS, City, CPT1, and RBT. For research, I believe publications and posters can stand on their own, but I would double check with anyone else that's also applied for AMCAS. My second sub tip to save characters is to abbreviate. When you are abbreviating, make sure you keep everything consistent. So for example, if you decide to use numbers instead of writing them out, make sure all your numbers are numbers. I would condense month names, so instead of writing the full January, just JAN. And lastly, acronyms. I would suggest to use acronyms only if you have listed out the full name somewhere before. For example, I talked about Vietnamese community health a lot, but instead of writing Vietnamese community health every single time, I condensed it to VCH. Recommendations on how to get started. Now that we got the tips in line for you to start writing, let's tackle that beast of finding the motivation to start writing. First tip, just to stay organized, create your list of involvements and rank them. After you've done this, ask yourself, did you cover all holistic bases? And this spans, did you hit all the diverse categories as well as the characteristics that you want to convey? Let's say you list your list and you can't quite limit it to 15. Can any involvement be combined with one another? My second tip on how you can get started is to outline. Get the writing gears grinding and the main ideas out. I suggest bullet pointing and having the last step be writing in order to make it sound more cohesive and less intimidating as a project. Third tip on how you can get started is to, like in a fight, break it up. Treat each writing session as high impact. Instead of seeing it as one daunting task to write 15 entries, break it up. When you tell your brain to write 15 entries in one go, you're more likely to either procrastinate or haphazardly do it. Instead, if you reframe it to, okay, for today, I just have to write 2 or 3 in the span of 5 to 8 days, you'll have your whole section completed in a way that's powerful and meaningful. My last tip on how you can get started is to ride the mindless momentum. People say when it comes to productivity to attack the most difficult task first when you have the greatest amount of willpower, but let's just say you're really starting with struggling in general. At this point, start with the easy tasks and build your way up. What I mean by easy is kind of like the mindless but still productive tasks associated with the AMCAS application. Filling out simple descriptors such as your contact information or entering your courses or your biographic info. So in a way, I suggest for you to do kind of the tedious work that's kind of a drag. Eventually that will get you into the momentum or in the headspace to fill out the other important parts of your application. That that concludes everything I wanted to discuss in today's video. If you found any part of this beneficial, I'd really appreciate it if you shared it with a friend who's also going through this cycle. Applying can be a very sensitive and stressful time, so please find any way to support and check in with one another. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.